The scent of cinnamon and yeast usually brings peace, but today, it smelled like adrenaline. My name is Katie. I'm 24 and I own the best bakery in the city. To my customers, I'm the girl who makes the perfect sourdough. To my boyfriend, Robbie, I'm the getaway. Across the street sits the First National Vault. It's cold, gray, and filled with $40 million. Robbie is going to take it tomorrow morning, and I'm the one who's going to help him. Robbie isn't a bad man, he's just a man who's very good at a bad thing. At 27, he's the most successful bank robber in the tri-state area. He's never been caught, never left a fingerprint, and never used a gun. He calls himself a liquidator of corporate greed. He promised me this is the last one. One final score to fund a life where we don't have to look over our shoulders. But the person looking over our shoulders right now is the one person I can't outrun. My father. My father, Mathew, is a retired detective who doesn't know how to be former. He spends his mornings in my bakery, drinking black coffee and staring at the vault across the street. He's obsessed with the ghost robber. He says he can feel him in the air, like a storm that hasn't broken yet. He's coming for this one, Katie, Dad told me this morning, his eyes narrowing. I can smell the desperation, and when he moves, I'll be the one waiting in the shadows. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. My father was hunting my future husband, and he was doing it from a bistro chair while eating my blueberry muffins. I watched Robbie through the back window as he unloaded flour sacks that were actually filled with thermal drills and signal jammers. We were hiding a heist in plain sight. If Dad walked into the kitchen right now, my life would end. Not with a bang, but with the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. "You're quiet today, KT," Dad said, tapping his finger on the counter. He was using his interrogation voice, the one that made seasoned criminals spill their guts. "Just thinking about the holiday orders, Dad," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked at the vault again. "The security there is outdated. A pro could bypass the lasers in 4 minutes. If I were the ghost, I'd use the bakery's roof for the thermal relay." He was too smart. He was already ahead of us. I had to move. I walked to the back and grabbed Robbie by the arm, pulling him into the walk-in freezer. "My dad is onto the roof relay," I hissed, the cold air biting at my skin. Robbie's face went pale, then hardened. "We can't change the plan now, Katie. The window is too small. If we don't hit that vault tomorrow, the feds move the cash. We'll be broke and on the run." I looked at the man I loved. I have to distract him. I have to make him choose me over the collar. The plan for the heist was a masterpiece of timing. At 8 a.m., a distraction at the main harbor would pull the local patrol cars away. At 8:05, Robbie would enter through the service tunnel. But Dad was planning to sit in my shop all morning. He wasn't just watching the bank, he was watching the world. "Dad," I said, walking back out. "I need a favor. I'm having a mechanical issue with the ovens at the satellite kitchen. Can you go check it out for me tomorrow morning?" Mathew looked at me, and for a second I saw the detective fade and the father return. "Tomorrow? But the ghost?" "The ghost is a myth, Dad," I interrupted, my voice cracking with fake exhaustion. "I'm your daughter, and I'm drowning in work. Please, I need you." He hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the vault across the street. It was a tug of war between his legendary instinct and his love for me. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. 8 a.m. I'll be at the other kitchen." He left, and I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to lean against the cooling racks. But as I watched him walk to his car, he stopped. He looked up at my roof. He saw a tiny, glinting piece of copper wire that Robbie had dropped. He didn't say anything. He just got into his car and drove away. My blood turned to ice. He knew. He knew the bakery was involved. He wasn't going to the satellite kitchen. He was going to set a trap. I ran to Robbie's apartment above the shop. "He saw the wire! The plan is blown!" Robbie was sitting at the table cleaning a set of lockpicks. He didn't look surprised. "I know, Katie, I saw him looking. But there's something you don't know." He pulled out an old internal affairs file from 20 years ago. It had my father's name on it. "Your dad didn't retire because he was tired. He was forced out because he was framed for a theft he didn't commit. The evidence that clears him is in that vault," Robbie said, his voice a low, steady anchor. The men who framed him are the ones who own the private boxes in the back. I'm not just taking the 40 million, Katie. I'm taking the truth. If we succeed, your dad gets his life back. If we fail, he spends the rest of his days thinking his daughter is a criminal. The stakes weren't just about our future, they were about my father's past. The morning of the heist arrived with a heavy, gray fog. At 7:55 a.m., the street was silent. I was behind the counter, my hands shaking as I arranged the morning danishes. Across the street, the vault stood like a silent fortress. I saw Robbie slip into the service alley, a shadow among shadows. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check the roof, Katie. The view is better from up here." It was my father. He was already on top of my building. I bolted for the stairs, my lungs screaming as I burst onto the roof. My father was standing by the ventilation unit, holding the thermal relay in his hand. He looked at me, and the disappointment in his eyes was more painful than any bullet. "You lied to me, Katie." "For him? For a thief?" I stood my ground, the wind whipping my apron. "He's not just a thief, Dad. He's in there right now getting the file. The one from the IA investigation. The one that clears you." Dad froze. The name of the file, the one thing he had obsessed over for 20 years, stilled his hand. "He can't get that file, Katie. It was destroyed in the precinct fire." "It wasn't," I shouted over the sound of a distant siren. "The developers who framed you kept it as insurance. It's in box 402. Robbie isn't doing this for the money. He's doing it so we can be a family without a shadow." Suddenly, the ground shook. A muffled explosion from the vault. The alarm at the First National began to wail, a high-pitched scream that tore through the morning fog. "Katie, get down!" Dad yelled, pulling me behind the brick ledge. We looked over the edge just as the service door of the vault flew open. Robbie emerged carrying a heavy duffel bag. But he wasn't alone. 3 black SUVs screeched onto the sidewalk, blocking his path. These weren't police. These were the men who owned Box 402, and they weren't planning on making an arrest. The men in the black SUVs didn't wait for a conversation. They stepped out with a cold, professional precision that made my father's posture shift instantly. He wasn't a retiree anymore. He was a hunter. "Those aren't feds, Katie," he hissed, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "Those are cleaners. They don't want the money back. They want the contents of that duffel bag erased." Robbie was pinned against the brick wall, the bag clutched to his chest, realizing he had walked into a crossfire. "Robbie, the bakery basement!" I screamed from the roof, my voice lost in the wind. My father looked at me, then at the man he had been hunting for months. The conflict was written in the lines of his face, the law versus the blood. "If I help him, I'm an accomplice," Dad whispered. "If you don't, you're a father who watched his daughter's future die," I replied. He didn't say another word. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his old service whistle, and let out a piercing rhythmic blast. The sound echoed off the canyon of buildings, a signal every local beat cop still recognized. Below, Robbie used the momentary confusion to dive toward the service entrance of my bakery. The cleaners opened fire, the silent thud of suppressed rounds shattering my front display window. Glass sprayed across the sidewalk like diamonds. "Get down," Dad roared, shielding me with his body. We heard the heavy clack of the bakery's deadbolt sliding into place. Robbie was inside, but so were we. We scrambled down the fire escape and burst into the kitchen. The air was thick with the smell of scorched sugar and gunpowder. Robbie was leaning against the prep table, gasping for air, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. "I got it, Mathew," he wheezed, throwing a blood-stained manila folder onto the flour-dusted counter. "Box 402, the original testimony. The signatures are all there." My father stared at the folder like it was a holy relic. The front door of the bakery groaned under the weight of a battering ram. "They're coming in, Dad!" I yelled, grabbing a heavy rolling pin, a pathetic weapon against what was outside. My father grabbed the folder, tucked it into his waistband, and looked at Robbie. "Can you walk, son?" Robbie nodded, jaw set in pain. "Then get in the oven," Dad commanded. I blinked. "The oven?" "The industrial walk-in," Dad clarified. "The vents lead to the old subway line. Go, now." We didn't have time for a goodbye. I pushed Robbie into the cooling racks of the massive walk-in oven, sliding the hidden panel behind the heat shields. As the panel clicked shut, the front windows of the bakery exploded. 3 men in tactical gear stepped over the shards, their suppressed weapons scanning the room. My father stood in the center of the kitchen, hands raised, his face a mask of bored innocence. "Can I help you, boys? We aren't open for breakfast yet." The lead man, a mountain of a human with a jagged scar across his nose, stepped forward. "Where's the bag, detective? And where's the boy?" My father didn't flinch. "I'm retired, son, and the only boy in here is the sourdough starter. You're trespassing on private property." Scarface didn't care about the law. He kicked over a rack of cooling loaves. "Search the place. If they aren't here, burn it. Leave no witnesses to the file." My heart stopped. They were going to burn my life to the ground to hide their tracks. I looked at the flour-covered floor, noticing a trail of Robbie's blood leading straight to the walk-in. If they saw it, he was dead. I grabbed a bag of powdered sugar and tripped, sending a white cloud billowing into the air, covering the crimson spots. "Clumsy me," I sobbed, faking a panic attack. The men ignored me, focused on the heavy steel doors of the walk-in. "Default text, it's empty," one of the men shouted, emerging from the back office. "But the roof relay is still active. They're using the bakery's power to jam the local police frequencies." Scarface looked at my father, a cruel smile forming. "Clever, but useless. Without that file, you're just a disgraced cop and she's just a baker with a burnt-down shop." He pulled a small incendiary device from his vest. "Last chance, Mathew. Give us the folder, and she lives." My father looked at me, then at the walk-in where Robbie was hiding in the vents. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a stack of napkins. He tossed them on the counter. "There's your file, now get out of my daughter's shop." The lead man snatched them, realized they were blank, and let out a growl of rage. He raised his weapon, but he didn't fire. A sudden, massive explosion rocked the street outside. My father had set a secondary charge on the vault's gas main. The shockwave sent everyone to the floor. "Now, Katie!" Dad yelled. He didn't run for the exit. He ran for the industrial mixer. He flipped the switch to high, and the massive metal paddle began to spin, throwing hundreds of pounds of wet dough and flour into the air like a localized blizzard. In the whiteout, Dad grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the cellar stairs. "The tunnel! We meet Robbie at the 4th Street station." We scrambled through the dark, damp tunnels, the sound of the bakery burning above us a dull, heartbreaking thud. I was crying, not for the shop, but for the life I thought we had lost. "He's going to be okay, Katie," Dad panted, his hand firm on mine. "Robbie is a ghost, remember? You can't kill a ghost." We reached the platform just as a maintenance train slowed down. A door opened and a hand reached out. It was Robbie. He pulled us into the moving car, collapsing against the crates of tools. He was pale, but he was grinning. He handed my father the real manila folder, which he had hidden inside his vest the whole time. "Box 402, Mathew, I told you I'd get it." My father opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents he had spent 20 years dreaming about. His hands trembled. "It's all here. The payoffs. The falsified reports. I'm clean, Katie. I'm finally clean." We sat in the flickering light of the subway car, 3 fugitives in the dark. The money from the vault was gone. Robbie had left the cash behind to make sure he could carry the truth. "The bakery is gone, Robbie," I whispered, leaning my head on his good shoulder. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, charred object. It was my mother's wedding ring, which I had kept in the register. "I got the only thing that mattered," he said. The train emerged into the morning light of the suburbs. My father looked at the folder, then at the man he was supposed to arrest. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his old handcuffs, and tossed them out the open door into the weeds. "The ghost robber died in that fire," Dad said, looking Robbie in the eye. "And Mathew the detective died with him. I think it's time we all learned how to bake something new, far away from here." The suburbs felt too quiet, a stark contrast to the ringing in my ears from the explosion. We huddled in a safe house Robbie had prepared months ago, a small, nondescript ranch house with an overgrown lawn. My father sat at the kitchen table, the manila folder spread open before him like a map to a forgotten world. "They'll be looking for us," he said, his voice returning to its steady, tactical rhythm. Men like Scarface don't just stop because a building blew up. Robbie was slumped in an armchair, his shoulder patched with a makeshift bandage. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, jagged exhaustion. "They can't go to the police," Robbie noted, his voice weak. "Not with that folder out there. If they try to hunt us publicly, the truth about Box 402 comes out. They're stuck playing in the shadows now." I looked at them both, the hunter and the prey, now bound by the same secret. "We need to go on the offensive," I said, my voice surprising even me with its sharpness. I wasn't just a baker anymore. I was a survivor. "Dad, you know how these guys move. You know their networks." My father looked up from the documents, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "The men who framed me are the same ones funding the mayor's re-election. If we hit their offshore accounts using the codes in this folder, we don't just clear my name. We bankrupt them." The witty reversal was starting to take shape. Robbie knew the digital side of the heist, and Dad knew the human side of the corruption. I was the one who knew how to keep them fed and focused. "They think we're running," Robbie said, pulling a laptop from a hidden floor compartment. "But we're going to sit right here and dismantle their empire piece by piece. We'll use the bakery's insurance claim as a digital smokescreen." For the next week, the ranch house became a command center. I spent my days scouring the news, watching for any mention of the bakery fire or the vault heist. The headlines were suspiciously vague. "Electrical failure causes fire in local business." They were trying to bury it. But beneath the surface, the folder was a gold mine. It didn't just have evidence of the frame-up, it had the routing numbers for a $1 billion slush fund. "I've got it," Robbie whispered one night, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "The main account is tied to a shell company in the Caymans. If I can trigger an internal audit using Mathew's old badge number as the whistleblower key, the funds freeze automatically. They'll be penniless by breakfast." My father leaned over his shoulder. "Do it. Let's see how Scarface likes working for free." The morning the accounts froze, the news finally broke, but not the way they expected. The city's biggest developers were being investigated for unexplained financial irregularities. My father stood by the window, watching a black sedan cruise slowly down our street. "They found us," he said, his hand moving to a heavy wrench on the counter. "They're desperate now. Desperate men make mistakes, but they also make a lot of noise." We didn't run. We had prepared the house. Robbie had wired the sprinkler system to spray a high-viscosity oil, and Dad had booby-trapped the porch with non-lethal flashbangs he'd borrowed years ago. As the black SUV stopped in front of the house, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was Katie the baker, and I was about to serve these men the most bitter meal of their lives. Scarface stepped out of the car, looking significantly less polished than he had at the bakery. He was alone this time. The mercenaries he'd hired had likely quit once their paychecks stopped clearing. He walked up the driveway, a heavy briefcase in one hand, and a look of pure malice in his eyes. "Mathew!" he yelled. "I know you're in there. Give me the laptop and I'll walk away. I've got nothing left to lose." My father opened the front door, leaning casually against the frame. "You've got a lot to lose, Henderson," Dad said, using the man's real name. "Like your freedom, the FBI is currently at your penthouse. I sent them a digital copy of the folder an hour ago." Henderson let out a roar of rage and lunged for the porch. Click. The flashbang went off, a blinding white light that sent him stumbling into the oil-slicked yard. He slid across the grass like a character in a dark comedy, landing face first in a rosebush. Robbie and I stepped onto the porch, watching as the legendary cleaner struggled to find his footing. "You missed a spot," I joked, echoing my father's old police humor. Henderson looked up, his face covered in mud and oil, realized the game was truly over. The sirens were already audible in the distance. The police arrived, but they weren't the ones Henderson had in his pocket. They were the untainted squad my father had spent his retirement vetting. As they led Henderson away in handcuffs, one of the officers walked up to my father and gave a crisp, respectful salute. "Detective Mathew, it's an honor to have you back on the right side of the tape." Dad looked at the folder in his hand. "I never left," he said quietly. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and public apologies. My father's name was cleared in a front-page story, and the ghost robber was officially declared a casualty of the bakery fire. a tragic mystery that would never be solved. Robbie was given a new identity as Robert Miller, a consultant for the very bank he had successfully breached. The witty reversal was complete. The thief was now the guardian. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and public apologies. My father's name was cleared in a front-page story, and the ghost robber was officially declared a casualty of the bakery fire, a tragic mystery that would never be solved. Robbie was given a new identity as Robert Miller, a consultant for the very bank he had successfully breached. The witty reversal was complete. The thief was now the guardian. A year later, a new shop opened on the same corner where the old bakery had stood. The sign was different now. The Detective and the Thief. It was a high-tech security firm with a cafe in the lobby. I was back behind the counter, the scent of cinnamon once again filling the air. Robbie handled the vault testing and my father handled the investigations. We were a family business, built on the ruins of a secret. Mathew walked in, grabbing a black coffee and sitting in his favorite chair. He looked at the vault across the street, which now had the most advanced security system in the world, designed by Robbie. "You know, Katie," Dad said, taking a bite of a muffin, "I think I finally figured out why I wanted to catch that ghost so badly." I leaned on the counter. "Why, Dad?" He smiled. "Because I knew he was the only one who could actually outrun me." The cafe was quiet, the mid-morning sun casting long shadows across the polished floor. Robbie walked in from the back office, tossing a set of digital blueprints onto the counter. "The new regional vault in Miami wants an audit," he said, reaching for a cinnamon roll. "They heard we're the only ones who can find the unfindable flaws." My father looked up from his coffee, his eyes twinkling. "Make sure you charge them the family rate, Robbie. Honesty is expensive these days." We had built a life on the ashes of our secrets, but the thrill of the win hadn't completely faded. I looked at the glass case filled with sourdough and realized that the tension was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant peace. But as I turned to clear a table, I saw a woman standing outside the front window. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, her eyes fixed on the vault across the street. My heart did a familiar, rhythmic roll. She walked inside, the bell above the door chiming with a sharp, clear ring. She didn't look at the menu. She walked straight to the counter. "I'm looking for Katie," she whispered. I wiped my hands on my apron. "I'm Katie. Can I help you?" She leaned in, her voice a low, jagged rasp. "My name is Elena. I worked for the firm that owned Box 402. I didn't get out before the accounts froze. And now the men who replaced Henderson are looking for me." I looked at my father. He had already stood up, his detective instincts snapping into place like a loaded spring. Robbie had stopped eating, his hand hovering near the silent alarm button under the counter. "Why come to us?" my father asked, his voice a cold, steady anchor. Elena pulled a small silver locket from her pocket. Inside was a microchip. "Because the folder you found was only half the story. This chip contains the names of the people who actually hired Henderson." The witty reversal was entering its final, most dangerous act. We thought we had cleared the board, but we had only taken out the pawns. The king was still in play. "If you stay here, you're bringing them to our doorstep," I said, looking at the street where the black SUVs once ruled. Elena shook her head. "No, I'm bringing you the chance to finish what you started. They think you're just a security firm now. They don't think you're still hunters." "We aren't hunters," Robbie said, standing up and walking to the counter. "We're retirees. I'm a consultant, and she's a baker." Elena looked at the microchip. "This chip is worth more than the $40 million you left in that vault, Robbie. It's the ledger for the city's underground shadow bank. If you help me upload this to the federal grid, the people who destroyed Mathew's career won't just go to prison. They'll be erased from history." My father walked over and took the locket. He looked at it for a long time, the reflection of the cafe lights dancing on the silver. "Katie, the bakery has a very strong cellar," he said softly. I knew that tone. He was asking for permission to go back into the dark one last time. I looked at Robbie, who gave me a silent, supportive nod. "The cellar is reinforced, Dad, and the ovens are off for the day. Let's see what's on that chip." We moved to the back, the smell of flour and security hardware blending into a unique aroma of resistance. Robbie plugged the chip into his main console, his fingers flying across the keys. The screen turned a violent shade of red. Encryption level, Omega. "This isn't a ledger," Robbie breathed, his face going pale. "This is a kill switch. If we try to upload this to the feds, it triggers a wipe of every police record in the city, including Mathew's clearance." The twist was a knife in the gut. The very thing that could take down the villains was programmed to destroy my father's newly restored reputation. Elena looked at the screen, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and terror. "I didn't know," she stammered. "They told me it was a ledger." My father looked at the monitor, his name flashing in the delete queue. "It's a trap," he whispered. "They knew we'd find Elena. They knew we'd try to be the heroes." "We can't upload it," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs, "but we can't let them have it back." Suddenly, the front window of the cafe shattered. A canister of tear gas spun across the floor, hissing like a serpent. "Get down!" Robbie roared, pulling us toward the walk-in. They weren't using SUVs this time. They were using a delivery van marked City Maintenance. They were hiding in plain sight, just like we had. The air in the cafe turned into a thick, white fog. I couldn't see my father or Robbie. I could only hear the sound of boots on the broken glass. "The chip, Alex," a voice boomed, the smooth, professional voice of Henderson's replacement. "Give it to us, and the girl lives." I felt a hand grab my arm, pulling me toward the cellar door. It was my father. "Katie, take the chip. Go to the vault across the street, the one Robbie designed." "The vault?" I coughed, the gas stinging my eyes. "Dad, that's suicide. It's a fortress." My father handed me the locket, his face a mask of absolute resolve. "It's the only place with a dedicated offline fiber line that isn't connected to the city grid. If you upload it from there, the kill switch won't reach the police servers. It'll only hit the targets." He pushed me toward the service tunnel. "Robbie will cover you. I'm going to finish the maintenance." I scrambled through the dark tunnel, the sound of gunfire echoing behind me. I reached the service hatch of the First National Vault, the same one Robbie had used a year ago. But this time, I had the access codes. I entered them with shaking fingers. Access granted. The heavy steel door slid open with a whisper. I was inside the heart of the machine. The room was silent, filled with the hum of servers and the smell of ozone. I found the terminal. Upload status, pending. I plugged in the microchip. The screen flickered, the red Omega code fighting against Robbie's bypass scripts. "Come on, Robbie," I whispered, watching the progress bar. 15%, 30%. Outside, I heard the sirens of the real police. My father had called in the cavalry, but they wouldn't get here in time to stop the men in the delivery van. I had to finish this. Upload status, 100%. The screen turned a brilliant, solid green. A message appeared. Shadowbank neutralized. Evidence disseminated. At the same time, my phone buzzed. A video feed from the cafe. I saw my father and Robbie standing over the maintenance men who were now in handcuffs. My father looked into the camera and gave a tired, witty wink. "Katie," he said, his voice crackling, "I think it's time to close the shop. We've got a lot of cleaning up to do." The vault door hissed open as the police flooded the street outside. I stepped out into the crisp air, clutching the locket like it was a piece of my own soul. The maintenance van was being towed away, and the men who tried to erase my father's life were being loaded into the same transport they'd once used to disappear others. The witty reversal was absolute. The shadow bank had just funded its own downfall, and every cent was being redirected to the city's public funds. Robbie met me halfway across the street, his face covered in soot, but his eyes bright with relief. He didn't say a word. He just pulled me into a hug that smelled of flour and gunpowder. "It's over, Katie," he whispered into my hair. The server wipe failed. The kill switch hit a dead end. I looked over his shoulder and saw my father standing by the shattered cafe window, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy burden. "The city is going to want a statement, Mathew," a high-ranking officer said, walking up to my father. Dad just took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at the ruins of our morning rush. "My statement is that I'm retired," he said, pointing to the closed sign dangling from one hinge. "And my daughter has a lot of baking to do. If you want the truth, it's all in the green files on that chip. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a family meeting." We spent the next week in a whirlwind of legal depositions and grand jury testimonies. But this time, we weren't the ones under the microscope. The shadow bank investigation led to the resignation of the mayor, 3 council members, and the entire board of the development firm that framed my father 20 years ago. The bakery was gone, the cafe was a mess, but our name was finally undeniably clean. We weren't the baker, the thief, and the cop anymore. We were just the survivors. "We can't stay here," Robbie said one night as we sat on the floor of the empty cafe surrounded by packing crates. "The fame is just as dangerous as the secrets. Every ghost enthusiast in the country is going to be looking for this corner." My father nodded, looking at the spot where the old industrial mixer used to be. "I've spent my life in this city, but I think I'm ready for a view that doesn't include a bank vault. What about that ranch house in the suburbs?" "The ranch is too small for a commercial kitchen," I noted, a mischievous smile forming. "But I hear there's a quiet little town in Vermont that needs a security firm and a world-class pastry shop. And the local sheriff is an old friend of yours, Dad." My father's eyes lit up. "Vermont, huh? No high-rises, no shadow banks?" "Just maple syrup and mountains," Robbie added. The decision was made. We were taking the witty reversal on the road. We sold the corner lot to the city, with a legal clause that it must remain a public park named after the officers who were cleared in the investigation. As the moving truck pulled away, I looked back at the empty space where my bakery had stood. I wasn't sad. The recipes were in my head, and the people I loved were in the car. We were leaving behind the fire and the gunpowder. We were going toward the cinnamon and the peace. The drive north was the longest and most beautiful journey of my life. Robbie drove, Dad navigated with an old-school paper map, and I sat in the back, finally letting myself sleep without listening for the sound of an SUV. When we crossed the state line, the air changed. It was colder, sharper, and smelled of pine. We pulled up to a sprawling old farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a massive barn that was perfect for a security hub. "The kitchen is in the back," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It was an old inn once. The ovens are brick-fired." I walked into the kitchen and felt my heart swell. It was perfect. I looked at the barn, where Robbie and my father were already debating where to put the server racks. "We're going to call it the Ghost and the Garnish," I shouted through the window. Robbie laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound was completely free of tension. The grand opening was a local sensation. We didn't advertise our past, but the quality of the sourdough spoke for itself. My father sat on the porch in a rocking chair, acting as the unofficial security for the town. Robbie ran a quiet consultancy from the barn, helping local businesses protect themselves from the kind of people we'd left behind in the city. We were a family business again, but the stakes were finally as light as a puff pastry. One crisp autumn morning, a man walked in wearing a tailored suit that looked entirely too expensive for Vermont. He sat at the counter and ordered a black coffee and a bear claw. "I'm from the Department of Justice," he said, sliding a business card across the wood. My heart did a tiny, old-fashioned roll, but I didn't flinch. "I'm just a baker," I said, sliding his bear claw over. "And my security consultant is in the barn." "We know who you are, Katie," the man said, his voice respectful. "We aren't here for an arrest. We're here to offer Robbie and Mathew a contract. The new National Cybersecurity Task Force needs people who know how to think like the people we're hunting. They want your maintenance team to be the instructors." I looked at my father, who had walked in the back door. He looked at Robbie. They both looked at me. "The contract is for remote work only," my father stated, his detective voice returning for a fleeting second. "We don't leave the shop on weekends, and we don't do cleanups anymore." The man smiled and stood up. "We wouldn't have it any other way. We just want the brains, not the boots." As he left, I realized the witty reversal was complete. The world finally recognized that the best way to catch a ghost was to hire the people who knew how to live as one. We took the contract, but it didn't change our lives. We still woke up at 4 a.m. to start the ovens. We still argued over the best way to secure the perimeter of the flour silo. My father finally learned how to make a decent croissant, though he still insisted on investigating every batch for consistency. Robbie stayed retired from the vaults, focusing his genius on making sure the little guys never had to worry about a box 402 of their own. As the sun set over the Vermont mountains on a Sunday in January 2026, I sat on the porch with a glass of cider. I looked at the sign swinging in the breeze, The Ghost and the Garnish. My father was in his chair, Robbie was by my side, and the only sirens we heard were the distant, peaceful calls of the local fire station. We had outrun the shadow, outplayed the bank, and finally, beautifully, we had found the perfect recipe for a second chance. The Department of Justice contract was more than a paycheck. It was a shield. By 2026, the name Miller was respected in the highest halls of power, but in our small Vermont town, we were just the family that made the best sourdough in the county. My father spent his afternoons patrolling the local farmers market, and Robbie had finally traded his lockpicks for a set of high-end pastry bags. But as every baker knows, you have to watch the oven or the crust will burn. One Tuesday, a familiar black SUV, the updated 2026 model, pulled into our gravel driveway. I felt the old adrenaline spike, but I didn't reach for a rolling pin. I reached for the radio. "Dad, Robbie, we have a visitor. And he's not here for the maple glazed." A man stepped out, but it wasn't a mercenary. It was Henderson's former lawyer, looking pale and holding a briefcase. He walked into the shop, his eyes darting toward the barn where our server racks hummed. "I'm not here to fight," the lawyer stammered, setting the briefcase on the counter. "I'm here to settle. The remaining board members of the development firm have been indicted. They're liquidating everything to avoid a life sentence, and they know you have the remaining encryption keys for the offshore interest accounts." He looked at my father, who had walked in with a dusting of flour on his apron. "They're offering a settlement. $50 million to hand over the keys and sign a non-disclosure." My father let out a dry, resonant laugh that echoed through the rafters. $50 million? You guys really don't learn, do you? Robbie walked in from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. "We don't need your money, counselor. We already have the Ghost's retirement fund, which, incidentally, we donated to the police pension fund last month. It felt appropriate." The lawyer's jaw dropped. He realized he was dealing with people who couldn't be bought because they had already won. "So what do you want?" the lawyer asked, his voice cracking. I stepped forward, leaning on the counter. "We want the names of the 3 remaining silent partners who haven't been indicted yet, the ones who authorized the fire at my bakery. Give us those names, and you can keep your $50 million. We'll take it out of their personal assets instead." The witty reversal was in full effect. We weren't just the survivors. We were the tax collectors for the truth. The lawyer didn't hesitate. He knew the ship was sinking, and he wanted a life raft. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a single encrypted tablet. "The names are there, and the proof of the insurance fraud they filed against your bakery." As he scurried out the door, Robbie snatched the tablet. "He just handed us the keys to the city's last shadow bank. Dad, I think we have one more audit to perform before the morning rush." We didn't need to break into a vault this time. We did it from the kitchen table, over a plate of warm cookies. By sunrise, the 3 silent partners were being greeted by the FBI, their personal fortunes diverted into a small business restoration fund for the neighborhood we'd left behind. The bakery fire hadn't just been a tragedy. It had become the most expensive mistake the corporate world ever made. We had turned their cleanup into a total liquidation. A few weeks later, my father received a heavy package in the mail. It was a new badge, gold and gleaming, with the title, Special Consultant Emeritus. It came with a letter of apology from the governor. Dad didn't pin it on his jacket. He framed it and hung it in the cafe, right next to a photo of the old bakery. "It's a nice hobby," he joked, "but I think I'm better at judging the proofing time on a baguette than I am at judging people." Robbie and I were married that June, on the wraparound porch under a canopy of Vermont wildflowers. My father walked me down the aisle, his step firm and his head high. There were no black SUVs, no cleaners, and no sirens. Just the sound of the wind in the pines and the laughter of our new neighbors. Robbie didn't promise me a life of diamonds and vaults. He promised me a life where the only thing we stole was a few extra minutes of sleep on Sunday mornings. The ghost robber was officially a legend now. A story told in police academies and dive bars about the man who broke the First National and vanished into the fog. Robbie liked to read the articles while he waited for the sourdough to rise. "They say I had a jetpack," he chuckled, pointing to a tabloid. I just kissed his cheek. "You didn't need a jetpack. You had a baker and a detective. That's much harder to catch." As 2026 rolled into its final months, the Ghost and the Garnish became the most successful, unintentional business in the state. We were a security firm that made pastries, or a pastry shop that secured the world, depending on who you asked. We had found the perfect balance between the adrenaline of the past and the peace of the present. We were a family built on a secret, but held together by the truth. I stood in the kitchen one snowy evening, watching the flour dance in the light of the brick oven. I thought about the girl in the apron who had stood on a roof in Philadelphia, watching her father hunt her boyfriend. That girl felt like a different person now. She was stronger, wiser, and she knew that the best getaway wasn't a car. It was a life worth living. I looked at the locket on the mantel, the microchip long gone, replaced by a photo of the three of us. "Ovens are at temp, Katie," Robbie said, walking in and pulling me into a hug. He looked at the window where the mountains were turning a deep royal purple in the twilight. "Dad is finishing the perimeter check. I think he's actually enjoying the snow." I smiled, leaning against him. "He's not checking for mercenaries, Robbie. He's checking for deer. He says they're the only thieves left that can actually outsmart him." We stood there for a moment, just breathing in the scent of home. We had outrun the shadow, outplayed the bank, and outlasted the lies. The witty reversal was no longer a tactic. It was our reality. We had taken a crime and turned it into a career, and taken a betrayal and turned it into a bond. The city could keep its vaults and its black SUVs. We had the mountains, the flour, and each other. As the clock struck midnight, the first batch of the day went into the oven. The sound of the timer was the only alarm we cared about now. My father walked in, stamping the snow off his boots and grabbing a fresh muffin. "Everything is clear, Detective Katie," he said with a wink. I laughed and handed him a glass of cider. "Everything is perfect, Dad, just like the recipe." We sat together in the warmth of the brick-fired kitchen, three people who had changed the world by refusing to be broken by it. The baker's Blindside wasn't about the heist. It was about the heart. It was about the moment a father chose his daughter and a thief chose the truth. And as the snow fell softly outside, covering the tracks of our past, I knew that the best stories don't end with a bang. They end with the smell of fresh bread. I turned out the main lights, the glow of the oven providing the only light in the room. I looked at the sign on the door one last time before heading upstairs. The ghost and the garnish, open for business. I smiled to myself, the emerald ring on my finger catching the fading light. We were ghosts no longer. We were home. And as for the vault across the street, I heard it's being turned into a library. I think I'll donate a few books.